Hi everyone, thank you for attending. So before we launch into today's webinar, what I'd like to take a look at is a couple of our previous webinars that might be related to this topic. So if you have some time, if you might take a look, there's some similar topics that are covered in these as we're covering today, so it might be worth your time to check these out. There's a couple of links here, both to the presentation slides and a YouTube recording of those previous webinars. So the first one about setting up your license server, and then the second one is about delving into the license file itself and kind of decrypting that. Also, there's going to be some upcoming webinars. So if you are, today we're going to cover Windows version of the License Manager software, but if you're interested in it, the Mac OS version or the Linux version, those are going to be covered next week, and then we have some other subject matter coming up in terms of installation troubleshooting and various other things coming in the coming weeks. So look out for all these upcoming webinars, and we'd be happy for you to attend. So what we're going to dive into now is getting started with the Network License Manager. So the Network License Manager is the tool that hosts the Autodesk licenses, and it's managed from within your own network rather than connecting out to the Autodesk servers to get a license. And so you're going to host the software. You're going to have a license file that contains all your licenses, and your clients are going to be connecting to that license manager, a server on your own environment that you're managing. And what you need is you're going to need the License Manager software, or LM tools. There's 2 links here, and these slides are going to be available for everyone, so if you want to download, have these links for your own records, we'll make that available to you. I'll give you the link at the end of the presentation so you can jot that down and pull these slides. But essentially there's 2 ways to get the license server software. You're going to be able to get it from the web, from the Autodesk website. You download the latest version. And it's also available on the media, the DVD media or the USB media of your Autodesk installers. Sometimes it's just easier to go online and download it from the web, but obviously some servers are not going to have internet access or not be able to do that. So you can always get it from the media, or even take that downloaded file and transfer it over manually. So apart from the software, what you need to do is you need to get a license file. So you can get that from the Autodesk Subscription Center. You log in with an Autodesk account, and you can generate a license file. Now, by default, the contract administrator has access to see all the serial numbers on the account. They might have given those permissions to other accounts as well. But if you don't see serial numbers, then you'll need to figure out what your contract administrator is, log in with that account, and you should be able to see them all. Once you have your serial numbers, or if you already know them, you can log in to registeronce.autodesk.com, and you can plug those in along with your servers, the host name of your server's MAC address, and you can generate yourself a license file. So that's how you do it yourself from the Subscription Center. You can also contact Autodesk registration and activation team. They can generate one for you, but if you want to do it instantly and yourself, that's the way to do it. Now, one note on license file and generating it yourself, you're going to have to generate all those licenses on the same day for them to be able to combine properly. How the license server works is if you have 2 licenses of the same type, for example, you have AutoCAD with one serial number, and then you purchase another AutoCAD with a different serial number. If you have a newer generated file, so you generated one on the 1st of last month and you generate one on the 1st of this month, and you try to put them together, the license server only sees the newest one. So in order to combine them, you need to generate all your licenses on the same day. If they have the same issue date, rather than replacing the older one, the license server sees them all as something to be combined together, and you'll get both your licenses. So best practice, if you're adding a license, just regenerate all your licenses, and that way you make sure that they're all being looked at together. There's also a tool that Autodesk makes available called the License Parser, licenseparser.com. And what you can do with this is you can load up your license file in that website and kind of look at it in a more graphical, user-friendly mode where you can see all your license serial numbers, issue dates, what features are on there without having to kind of decode that just by looking at the license in plain text. And we can take a look at that in a little bit when we do a demonstration. So what do you need to configure the License Manager software? So if you got your license file, you've got the software installed, what do you need to do? So you need to get your license file in place on your server. You need to create a log file. Log file is essentially just a text file that you're renaming with a .log extension, and then you'll have that to configure in your License Manager software, and that will keep track of various things like when your server stops, and when users are checking that in and out licenses. That all gets recorded in the log file. If your server has a problem starting, if your server has an error and closes down, that'll also be in the log file, so it's a good troubleshooting step. It's good on your server to enable file extensions when you're dealing with this, because otherwise when you try to create a text file for your license or for your log file, it's going to hide the .txt extension, and it makes it a little bit harder to rename those files to new extensions, .lic or .log. So that's a tip right there. Also, if you want to know about what exactly this license server software is running in terms of processes and services, what you're going to see when you start it up is 3 processes get started. It's lmgrd.exe, and that usually appears twice, and then adskflex.exe, that appears once. So that's normal to see those 3 running when you've started the license server. You're also, if you look in the services of the computer, going to see the Autodesk licensing service in there with whatever name you've given it. That'll be the name of the service. And there's a video of this as well, but I think in the interest of time, we're going to save some of that for the demonstration. So let's move on here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you a little bit of the license server software itself. Let's switch over here, and I'm also going to demonstrate a tool that Autodesk makes called Autodesk Remote. You should be seeing that up now. So Autodesk Remote, just real briefly, is a tool that's available to everyone who's on subscription, and it's basically a remote desktop tool that has some features that are specialized for using Autodesk software over the remote desktop, some touch commands and stuff that you can do, because Autodesk Remote is also available on the iPad. So for example, if you want to go give a presentation to someone and you don't want to lug around your big desktop system, and you just want to bring your iPad with you, but you still want to have the power to show something on Inventor or something like that, you can use Autodesk Remote into your desktop system and give that presentation. In this particular case, I'm just using Autodesk Remote to log into my license server, and we're taking a look at it here. So what I am going to show you is I'm going to actually get rid of our license service that I already have set up here. So I'm going to stop it, and then I'm going to remove it, and then we're going to start from scratch as if I had just started this or just installed the software. So let's remove this, and basically what we're seeing now is what you would see if you had just installed. So when you install LM Tools for the first time, you're going to see, I mean, if you have other license server services that use the Flexera, you might see them in here, but otherwise you're just going to see a default service name, FlexLM Service 1, showing in the Config Services tab, and a bunch of blank spaces, and server software is not doing anything yet. So what you're going to want to do is, once you've moved your license file over and created your debug log, which is just a text file that you've renamed with a .log extension, you're going to want to hit browse on these various windows and plug in the information. So launch LM Tools, go to Config Services. First we're going to look for the lmgrd.exe. This is an executable file that gets included when you install the software software. So wherever you've installed the Autodesk Network License Server software to, the default is under Program Files, Autodesk Network License Server. That's where you're going to find lmgrd.exe. We find that, open it, perfect. The license file, I usually recommend creating a folder called Licenses under the same directory as your license server software, so you remember where it is, and then you have license files on here. I usually recommend taking older license files and moving them to another directory and just keeping one license file that you're using just in the main directory, just to avoid confusion. But if you're switching back and forth between license files like I am for testing, I tend to keep them all in the same spot. But best practice, just have one license file. Everything else goes in a folder called old license files or something like that, so you're not getting confused. If you update your license file every year, you're going to end up with a few of them. So in this case, I'm going to pick this license file, and then the last thing I need to do is I need to set my debug log, which is just a text file that we renamed to .log. If you don't rename it .log, you can always switch over to looking for all files, and you can see text files in there as well, but easier if you just rename it .log. So debug.log, just an empty text file. It's going to get data written in it when we start the server. These checkboxes at the bottom, use services. This has to be checked. Start server at power up, you're probably going to want to be checked, otherwise the server doesn't start, or the service doesn't start automatically when your computer reboots. So once all this is done, you're probably going to want to rename the service too. It's a best practice because we don't like to use the default name with the Flex license server just because you might already have one out there with that name. And it's a little easier when you're looking at all your different services to know that you've oops, I guess I should have done that first. It's a lot easier when you're looking at all your different services to have one that's called Autodesk, and you know for sure, okay, this is it. You might forget Flex License Service. What does that mean? So we save the service. Now we're ready to start things up. We switch over to the Start, Stop, Reread tab. We start the server, and it should tell us server start successful, and then we're ready to go. If we want to check and see what's going on with our server, there's two ways. We can look at the log file that we've created, and it should have data written in it. We'll see some things like that the server started, when it started, what ports it's using, and then what license services it's hosting. And then when we scroll down to the bottom, eventually we'll start seeing when people are checking out licenses and checking them in, etc. You can also go into server status, perform status inquiry, and you can see a real time of who's got what licenses checked out, what server license version, etc. When you're stopping the server, I usually recommend checking the force server shutdown box. That just makes it shut down if it's not responding. When you hit stop server, it's going to say stopping server, but it's never going to say server stopped. For whatever reason, it just says stopping server forever, but the server will have stopped after usually about 5 seconds. So if you need to verify that, you can always check in your task manager. You can see if those services are still running. We can see if adskflex.exe is running, and if we don't see it, that's fine. We can look for lmgrd.exe, which is the other executable, not running. Perfect. We're not hosting the license server anymore. If you are running other license servers that are not Autodesk but also use Flexera, you're going to see lmgrd.exes for those as well, so don't get concerned if there's still some running if you're running another license server that uses LM tools. So let me start the server again. Now, a couple things to be aware of. If you're making a change to the license server service, if you're hosting other license servers, you're going to be able to see them all in LM Tools, even if you're just launching Autodesk version of Autodesk version of LM Tools. That's going to show everybody's license server service that's running the same, if it's 32-bit or 64-bit version of LM Tools software. It's going to show everybody's stuff. So make sure before you make any changes, before you stop and start servers, that you've got the correct one selected. Because if you've got a different one selected, you might stop the wrong service. If you need to get rid of a service, to remove it entirely, if you stop it, all it does is stop that service for now, but it leaves it on the system. If you need to get rid of it entirely, you have to go into the Config Services tab and hit Remove Service. And that's going to get rid of it altogether. So one thing I wanted to delve into a little bit here is the license file. So I'm going to bring that up. The license file is it's going to be made up of the server information at the top. You're going to see a line that says server, then it'll have the server's name, then it'll have the MAC address. Then you see use server and the vendor port. In general, you want to leave the vendor port as 2080 unless you absolutely have to change it. If you want to change the listening port, which is typically 27000 or something between 27000 or 27009, you add that here to the end of the first line. And that's once you save that change, if you start and stop the server again, that'll give you a new port. This avoids port conflicts if somebody's already using 27000 or something like that. After that, you get your actual licenses. Package licenses are made up of two parts, a package and an increment. And you'll see in the actual license there's some information about what individual licenses make up this package. So we have the Building Design Suite for 2015, 2014, 2013, 2012, as well as a couple of 2012 features for individual products that were added on. Then all this information is encrypted information about the actual license. The encryption is based on the MAC address that it was created for. If your MAC address changes on the server, you got to get a new license file. If you tried to go in here and manually change this MAC address, the decryption no longer works and your license file won't work. However, if you do want to change your server name, that's not based on the encryption, so that should be fine. Go ahead and take a look lower, and you'll see some other information here, like the serial number in the increment section. You'll see the date that it was issued. So this can be good for checking, which particular licenses you've already got on a license file and which ones need to be reissued, etc. Now, this can all be seen from our just Notepad, opening up the license file and reading it as pure text. It's a little bit easier to use our website, licenseparser.com, because then it's going to display that information in all kind of neat rows and things like that. So let me bring that up. Okay, so, oops. Give me 1 second, just pulling up a license file and then I'll share it with everyone. So when we pull up a license file in License Parser, what we're going to see is some information about what the MAC address is. We're going to see the host name. We're going to see the serial numbers. We're going to see the issue date. We're going to see the packages. So that's just a nice, cleaner way of taking a look at the same information that we'd see if you open it up in text. So moving on from that, what we're going to talk about is the top 10 issues. So once you have your license server set up, you might run into an issue of your clients are not able to see the license server, your clients are not able to get a license, various other things. This may happen right away. This may happen further down the road. So let's just try to head off some of these problems before they even arise. So once you've started up your license server, you're going to want to check a few things. Your firewall and potentially Windows Firewall might be turned on your server, or any third-party firewalls, or even any network firewalls, or anything like that. There's a demonstration of what it's going to take to add exceptions to your firewall here in the slides. I think I'm just going to go through that real briefly with everyone. Let me share that. I'm not sure how this is going to work with this resolution. Let's see how this goes. So yeah, I'm not sure that that's working with our resolution. Let's do this. Let's just look at a screenshot. I'm going to switch back to our slides. I'm going to pop over to a screenshot of this. So it basically looks the same on all versions of Windows once you get into the advanced firewall settings, and it's basically just a set of inbound rules and outbound rules. You only need to worry about the inbound rules, and you specifically need to set inbound rules for TCP ports 2080, and then the range 27,000 to 27,009 are the default port ranges used by the license server. If you go in to your control panel, the firewall, Windows Firewall control panel, if you go into the advanced settings, you go into inbound rules, you create new rules, that's what you're going to want to do. If you're running a third-party firewall, well, I mean, that's really going to depend on the version of the software that you're running. Whoever makes it might have instructions, but the end result will be the same, is that you need to open up these TCP ports 2080 and 27,000 to 27,009. If you're using a custom port outside of that range, obviously you need to open up that port as well, but that's by default what's going on. There's a way to check how your ports are doing. I've included a link here in the slides, and it will take you to an article. But essentially what it is it's using Internet Explorer on your client system. You open up Internet Explorer, you put in the name of the license server, so http:// your server name, and then you do a colon, and then the port that you want to check. So if your server is running on port 27,000, you can do a colon in that port, and then you should get a response back that's going to look like some ASCII characters, but as long as you get a response, then that port is open. So the license server software is just pinging back a response there. If you get a page cannot be displayed, then your port is not open. So it's a good way to check if your license server is working or is listening on those ports. What will happen if the ports are closed is, if the clients are trying to connect to the license server, they're going to get a license finder window. It'll tell them, put in the name of your license server, and even if you put it in, it'll say a -15 error or something to that effect, that the license server cannot be found. So what else can happen if the ports are open? There might be a conflict. So if you're running other license services, they might be also trying to run on port 27,000. So you want to first double check which license or which port your Autodesk license server is using. You can do that with a debug log. As I showed you a moment ago, you can do it with the server status. Most likely the default port it's going to go to is 27,000. There's a lot of good things about the latest version of license server software. It's solved a lot of problems in terms of using IPv4, IPv6, and it's got some expanded logging. But one of the problems that it introduced was it doesn't see the older versions of the license server software very well. Used to be, if an older version or if another version was running using the same port, the license server software would be pretty good about auto-detecting that and picking a different port. Not so much anymore, so you're more likely to get a port conflict and have to manually check. So if a port is being used already, 27000, you can just add a number at the end of your license file's first line change the port to 27001 or whatever an open port is. Any port within the range 27000 and 27009 is automatically going to be checked by Autodesk software when it launches. If you use a port outside of that range, then you'll have to specify it on the clients too. But usually, best practice, use something within that range. That'll save you some administration time of having to change anything on your clients, and hopefully you're not running 9 license services that are using things within that port range. So you can also use that tip I talked about to check if your ports are blocked, to also see if something's already running on that port. So if you stop the Autodesk license service in your LM tools, you can go back in and you can go to a client and you can run that test in Internet Explorer that I have a link to the article about, and see if the ports are responding. And if they are, that means something else is also using that port, and it'd be a good idea to switch over to a new port that is not giving any response. There's an article here about how to change what the port is being used, as I mentioned, by changing it in your license file. It also goes over how to change the default port being used by your clients as well. So if you need some more information on that, get the slides, delve into that. When you want to run the latest license server software, 2015 or newer, you're going to need to have the latest license server version, 11.12. If you're starting up from a new download, you're going to have 11.12, but if you've been running licenses for a while, you might not have that version, and you might need to upgrade. How to check what license server version you're using is in the server status. You're going to see a line that says license server up, and then it'll give you which version it's running. You want to see 11.12 in there. If you're running something older, it's not going to work with the 2015 licenses. It may work with older licenses, but if you want to upgrade, you're not going to be able to decrypt those licenses. I have a link here to the upgrade process for your license server software. Essentially what it is it's uninstalling the old version and installing the new version. The document's going to list a best practice of also removing your license service and then recreating it. So I'm going to give you a little tip. That's not actually necessary. The reason why we tell people to do that is to avoid the situation where they've had their old version in one directory and the new version in another directory, and the paths in the config services are still pointing to the old directory, and it gets confusing. What happens when you uninstall the license server software, LM Tools, is it's going to keep your services. It doesn't remove your services, Autodesk License Server or any other, if you don't manually remove them first. So if you want to leave the services there, you can, but what you do need to do before you upgrade is you need to stop your license server. Go to Stop, Start, Reread, stop the server, wait for it to stop, and then you can uninstall. If you don't stop it first, license file or the lmgrd.exe is going to be in use and may not remove and reinstall properly. So, and there will be a small amount of downtime while you uninstall the old version while it's stopped, and then reinstall the new version and start it, probably a few minutes at the most. Potentially your clients are not even going to notice this if they already have the software open, but they will notice it if they try to start the software during this period of downtime, because it'll tell them the license is not available. So if that's a concern, definitely do that after hours. But the process itself is relatively simple. Just a quick word on system requirements. So the latest version license server software dropped support for Windows XP and Windows Server 2003. So XP, Vista, and Server 2003 are no good. Other than that, most of the operating systems are supported. So let's just take a look real quick. I'm going to share my web browser. This is a page where you download your license server software. You can see here's the 11.12 version, IPv4, IPv6. And what is listed here are the supported operating systems. So Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2012, Windows 7, Windows 8. Any of those will work fine, and no particular one works better than the other than the fact that if you're running Server 2012 or sometimes in a lot of the newer server operating systems have more security features that you might potentially run into having to unblock something or change the way your security is set up to host these license files. But mostly if you're running default settings, it doesn't matter. Just because a new Windows Server operating system comes out does not necessarily mean that it's going to work with the LM tools. So upgrade cautiously. Whenever any new operating systems come out, don't assume they're going to work. You can test it out; it may or may not work, but it certainly won't have been tested until a supported version is released. So upgrade at your own risk. If you do try to run on an older, like Server 2003 operating system, and you're running the latest license server version, you're gonna definitely have problems. That is a known issue. So moving on from that, here's an error message that you might see come up: invalid license key, inconsistent authentication code. So what does that mean? If you're looking at your debug log and you see that and your server hasn't started, that means one of two things: your server name has changed, your MAC address has changed, or the license file was not created for the correct server name or MAC address. So you'll want to double check and see, in some cases, especially if people are using VMs, if you haven't specified your VM to use a specific MAC address and your server has multiple, your VM might switch MAC addresses when you reboot. So that's something to take a look at. Also, if you change network hardware or anything like that in your server, MAC address is going to change. Like I said, the decryption of the license file is based on the MAC address. If it doesn't see that matching MAC address on your system, you're going to get a problem. You're going to need a new license file generated. If your server name changed, not a big deal. You can go in, edit your license file, rename that server. But MAC address does require a brand new license file. So that's something to be aware of. So in some cases, the problem is not on the server, it's on the clients. Or if you make a change, changing the license server name, changing the actual license server, changing the port that you're using to a non-default port, you might need to make a change on the license lickpath.lick file on the clients. Lickpath.lick is a text file that's created when you install a network license version of our software, and it basically just contains a couple lines, and it has the server name that the client should be looking for to get its license. Now, one downside of lickpath.lick is there's a separate lickpath.lick file for every version of the Autodesk software installed, every network license version anyway. So you can see based on the screenshot here, if you got a bunch of different versions, you got a bunch of different lickpath.lick files. So from an administrative point of view, if you make a change to the license server, you don't really want to go in and edit every single one of those lickpath.lick files. Maybe fine if you have a couple of systems, one piece of software installed. If you got a bunch of systems or a bunch of software, your best bet is going to be using the environment variable, ADSKFlex_license_file, and that environment variable will override all of these lickpath.lick files, and then it will point to whatever server that you specify in that file. So there's a screencast here about how to do that. There's an article pointing to how to set that up. So if that's what you're interested in, you can delve more into that. Essentially, once you've made that change, it applies immediately to all Autodesk software. So the scenario in which it won't work is if you are having some software point to one license server and some software point to another. That's pretty rare, but just be aware of that. There's sometimes people have problems that their clients are using too many licenses, or they have 4 licenses, they're all used up when they shouldn't be. So what can be some different things that cause that? Well, a lot of times it's just a misunderstanding of how the licensing works. When you have a package license, you get different release years in your package license, but each release year that you open up uses a different seat of your license. So if you have 4 seats of Product Design Suite and somebody has a 2014 product and a 2015 product open, that's 2 seats being used. You can open every single product in that suite of 2015 all at once. It only uses 1 license. If you open AutoCAD 2015 and AutoCAD 2014, that uses 2 licenses. So there's an article link there that goes a little bit more into that, just the details of how that works. But essentially, if your clients are switching between versions, make sure they close out an older version before switching to a new one, or vice versa. Otherwise, they're going to be using more licenses than they thought they were. Another way that licenses can get used is borrowing licenses. Borrowing licenses is a way that a network license server takes a license off of the server, puts it on a local system, so that system can go offline out into the field or wherever it needs to do away from the network. So this is a really useful tool so people can take their work home or they can take it out in the field. The only downside is, while they're doing that, that license is not available on the server. The server is not having any communication, so it just keeps that license unavailable until it's checked back in by the person who borrowed it. Now, obviously, things happen to computers when they're out away from the office. The computer can crash, the computer can be stolen, and that license does not have the opportunity to be returned. If that happens, they basically need to either wait for the borrowing period to end or contact Autodesk support, and we can manually help you out with that. But either way, you're going to have some downtime before you get that license back into operation. So if that's a concern, you probably want to restrict the borrowing length of your licenses. By default, 6 months. That's pretty long for a license to be borrowed for. You can use an options file to restrict how long you're borrowing for. We'll go into options files a little bit in another slide, but that may be something you want to put in your environment. The other thing that might happen with your clients is you got folks who open up the software, they go take lunch, they leave it open, so you potentially have licenses out there that are in use but not being used. You can get some of those licenses back by setting timeouts. What that does is if the software has a period of inactivity, and however long that period is, you can set in your options file. But if after that period of inactivity, it gives a warning to the client and says, we've taken back your license. You can save your work and close out your software, or if the license is available again, they can check it out. So there's 2 ways to do that. It's either by product. So if in your options file, you can have a line that says timeout, and then you can put in the product feature code. You can get that from your license file or by looking it up online. And then you're going to put how many seconds. If you want it to apply to all products, just timeout all. You don't need to worry about the product feature code and then how many seconds. So if you want to set a 15-minute timeout, for everybody, then you're potentially going to be getting a lot of inactive licenses back, more flexibility, but at the same time, people might be, I just went out on my smoke break and now I got to, save my work, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's something that you're going to have to weigh if you want to use in your environment based on your, how many licenses you have available and who's using them. So going into the options file a little bit, this is a file. It's essentially just a text file that you create. You rename it adskflex.opt, and you put it in the same location that your license file is in, same folder. You can do a lot of really powerful things with this. You can reserve licenses for people. You can restrict licenses so that only certain people can get them. You can set this up based on users, based on computers, based on IP addresses. You can set groups of users and then have different rules apply to them. You can restrict borrowing, set timeouts. There's a lot of things that you can do that's fully enumerated in this link that I'm provided here in the slides. So if you're more interested in options files, I'd suggest delving into that, trying some things. The only problem with options files, though, is just make sure that once you've put some things into place that you're aware of what you have there. For example, there's an option called exclude or an option called include. And those 2 are basically used to restrict who can have access to specific licenses. If you include somebody, then everybody else is excluded. If If you exclude a group of people, they can't get that license. So just remember when you're setting up new users, who needs to be added to what groups in your options file to have access to what licenses. It's a little bit more to think about rather than just everyone getting access to licenses, but it will allow you to have greater control. So just to review, we've got some links here to blog posts, to various knowledge articles on a lot of the things that we talked about. Just a kind of one-stop shop for all these links. And